Without any announcement, without any warning, this moment quietly shook the global scene. Welcome to V Effect. I truly can't explain how much it makes me question people's actions when they believe in things that don't make much sense, just because they find it relevant and it meets society's heteronormative expectations. They prefer to believe in what they can't confirm and mock what Taekook has actually shared with us. But even if Taekook isn't real, on Jin's graduation day, Taehyung inadvertently provoked a rather obvious jealousy scene. He started by touching Jin's mouth to wipe away cake crumbs, and then licked his finger with a smile. At that moment, Namjoon immediately looked at Jungkook almost automatically, while Yoongi also seemed to be looking at him, although it's unclear whether he was looking directly at Jungkook, the camera, or both. As everyone's expressions came into close-up, Jungkook, looking down, revealed a dejected expression, but still, he seemed to be trying not to let it affect him too much. After a moment, he mustered the courage to look up and observe them again. The strange thing about it is that just as Hobie starts speaking, Jungkook bites his lower lip with obvious irritation. Jin jokingly comments that although he's old, that didn't stop him from graduating. And although Jungkook was still trying to control his emotions in the background, he finally manages to do so, but his smile no longer looks as natural as before and seems to be maintained only out of consideration for the fans. Then when Jimin jokes again about Jin's age, saying that he's already too old to graduate, Taehyung intervenes once more to defend him, scolding Jimin and stating that, in reality, Jin is in his prime, trying to make him feel good. And although Jungkook's smile fades and he glances sideways at the half-hug Taehyung is giving Jin before looking directly at Taehyung's face again, his expression is no longer as subtle as before. So when Hobie commented that Jin is young in the face, Taehyung suddenly puts his arm around Jin's neck and stares at him intently. Acting on instinct, Jungkook turned completely towards them, his mouth slightly open, and somewhat abruptly remarked that the taxi driver had thought he and Jin were the same age. However, when he turned back to Taehyung, he realized that Taehyung was still staring at Jin. So, right after Jungkook finished speaking, he quickly brought a hand to his neck, awkwardly touching his necklace and pretending to smell it to distract himself. He hadn't counted on Jin being so excited by Taehyung's behavior that he would pull him into a hug. At that moment, Jungkook stopped his pretense and looked at the camera with a strange expression, turning what had been a calm moment into a very confusing situation for him. Many can interpret Jungkook's jealousy and strange behavior however they want, but it's clear that these kinds of reactions have always shown that the relationship between Taehyung and Jungkook goes beyond simple friendship. Because if Taekook weren't real, what other reason would Jungkook have for acting that way with someone who's supposed to be just a friend? And if it really wasn't real, why, when Jungkook tried to get closer to Taehyung despite the awkward position, did Taehyung take him by the waist and stroke him before putting his arm all the way around Jungkook's shoulders to pull him closer? Taehyung's action, taking Jungkook's head to pull him closer so they could both look at the phone, was the most romantic gesture anyone could ever see, because it was the most precious and powerful scene that many people would want for their own fantasies. Since this sequence, in which Jungkook sought a comfortable position next to Taehyung and let him hug him, clearly demonstrated the nature of their relationship, I was still surprised by the number of people who asserted, with complete certainty, that Jungkook was uncomfortable with Taehyung's closeness and that he had only taken a quick photo before moving away. When in reality, after Jungkook stood there and Taehyung continued looking at his own phone, Jimin outside set off the water gun that Jungkook immediately recognized. That's why he stood up abruptly and moved away. The warning that something had gone off was even shown, explaining why Jungkook had only been lying with Taehyung for a few minutes, and why he moved away, because he knew Jimin was coming for them for getting him wet when he was feeling unwell. If Taekook weren't real, he could accept what many people said, interpreting these actions as normal between two friends. But their closeness seemed too comfortable and domestic to ignore. And that's why so many people were always afraid when Taehyung and Jungkook were in the same room. They knew this was nothing compared to what they could really show if they were left alone. Because it's funny to assume they aren't real when Jungkook himself had been acting impulsively for years. On that occasion, upon hearing Taehyung's explanation about wanting to go to the Cherry Blossom Festival with BTS, Jungkook reacted as soon as Taehyung changed his answer after Jungkook didn't choose him as he had initially done. Although Jimin had been the first to jokingly mention Taehyung and his group of friends from the cast of Warang, Jungkook had the courage to tell Taehyung that, if he loved them so much, he could go one spring day to play with those Hyungs. This thought seemed to have been created in his mind long before, and had no reason to be mentioned at that moment. When the staff noticed the members were being overly jealous of Taehyung's closeness with the Hwangs, Jungkook seized the opportunity to say that Taehyung was telling them he loved them while looking directly at them, revealing feelings he no longer seemed to want to hide. This made me wonder if many didn't see Taehyung as real. Why, when Taehyung started explaining the reasons for his affection for Wooga, did Jungkook feign disinterest and look away, as if that explanation wasn't what he really wanted to hear? I wonder if the people who witnessed this moment didn't notice how much this bothered Jungkook, to the point that when Taehyung continued talking about the promise they had made, Jungkook couldn't bear the jealousy that overwhelmed him and finally stood up mid-conversation, walking away and sitting far from them, not wanting to hear any more of what Taehyung was saying about other people. Of course, his attitude was quite strange and unusual for Jungkook. However, he wasn't being discreet, even though the situation could be considered unusual. His behavior always clearly reflected what he was feeling, and this showed that, instead of giving in to frustration, he preferred to distance himself for his peace of mind. Although it was a jealousy that, to this day, proves everything except that they are no longer a real couple, he was willing to spend time with Taehyung's closest friends, those he couldn't stand to hear about back then but can now accept. Because if Taekook hadn't been real, what made Jungkook not want to separate from Taehyung again? Even knowing that his comments were just jokes? When Taehyung jokingly asked if the fans would like him to shave his head again, like when they were in the military, Jungkook immediately shook his head. This made Taehyung laugh at his reaction and start saying that Taehyung wouldn't do it again, meaning he wouldn't go back to the military or cut his hair again, a memory Jungkook apparently wanted to erase. And although Taehyung didn't seem to take it seriously, because he continued laughing at Jungkook's rejection, Jungkook insisted again that Taehyung wouldn't do it again. But the tone he used sounded more like a tantrum than a simple plea to stop thinking about it, which made that moment one of the purest and most genuine for me. Because if there really wasn't anything between them, would there be any explanation? Why did Taehyung ask Jungkook for a private conversation? Taehyung had already asked when he would stop the broadcast, and Jungkook said he would make it longer because he didn't know Taehyung's intentions, thinking that maybe he just wanted to play a game of Overwatch with him, and that could wait. But when Taehyung headed for the door as if the staff had called him, and Jungkook and Jimin stared at each other strangely, Taehyung called Jungkook again, almost demanding that he end the live stream right then and there. Jungkook asked why he had to, and they both turned to look at him. But when Jungkook asked again why he was asking him to turn it off if he was live and apparently going to prolong it a bit, Taehyung ended up explaining briefly that it was so they could have a private conversation. With just that simple answer, Jungkook automatically agreed to finish what he was doing, even though just moments before he had said he was going to make it longer. Could someone really explain why, when Jungkook said he had to end it now, Jimin started making kissing noises and teasing the fact that the two of them were going to have a private conversation? It was really strange that he acted as if he knew the context behind those words, and Taehyung's urgency to get Jungkook to turn everything off. It's something that will never make me doubt what I believe today. Because if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that these moments have left a mark on the people who have believed in what Taekook has shown us over time. And if for you a false rumor that has already been debunked is more real, I'll stick with the version that for Taekook everything is more real and authentic.